Have you ever looked at an industry and just wondered why are they so profitable while everyone else is in a constant dogfight just to stay afloat? Well, the answer usually comes down to Porter's 5 forces. And today, we're going to break down this incredible framework so you can look at any business like a top-tier strategist. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the big picture, the competitive environment itself. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of each of the 5 forces. After that, we'll shift from theory to practice, how to actually use this thing, what mistakes to avoid, and finally, we'll watch it all play out in the super competitive world of agribusiness.
Before you can even think about winning a game, you gotta understand the playing field. In business, that field is what we call your microenvironment. It's the arena where all the action happens, right in your backyard.
Look, great strategy isn't about guesswork or having some kind of crystal ball. It's a discipline. It's about systematically scanning and mapping out every player on the board, your suppliers, your customers, your rivals, so you can spot those golden opportunities way before anyone else does and see the threats coming from a mile away. Okay, so let's get to the heart of it. Let's break down the 5 forces that really define the laws of gravity in your industry. Each one is like a lever of power that determines who wins, who loses, and how much money is actually on the table. First up, we've got the bargaining power of your suppliers. Just think about it this way. How much control do they really have over your business? These are the folks providing the critical stuff you need, and, well, their power can basically set your costs. It's really just a simple seesaw of power, right? When you've got tons of suppliers to choose from, you're in the driver's seat. But you have to watch out when they start merging and consolidating. Because when your suppliers become a powerful few, they can start turning the screws, raising prices, and literally draining the profit right out of your bottom line. Now let's just flip that coin over. It's not just about who you buy from, it's about who buys from you. The bargaining power of your buyers, your customers, is an absolutely massive force. It's driven by everything from cold, hard numbers to, the simple whims of what's cool. And what's so fascinating here is you've got these two different kinds of customer power. On one hand, you have the B2B buyer, who's got a spreadsheet open and is calculating the return on investment down to the penny. And on the other, you've got everyday consumers who hold enormous power through their values, demanding things like sustainability and transparency. If you ignore either of them, you're taking a huge risk. Whenever an industry is really profitable, it acts like a magnet. It's just constantly pulling in new competition. So this force, the threat of new entrants, is all about figuring out how high the walls are around your market. Are they just a small fence, or are they a massive fortress? Now, this risk is highest when a product is in that explosive growth phase. So your best defense is to build what we call a deep moat. This could be a super strong brand, some special technology, or maybe one of the strongest moats out there, the network effect. Think about it. Platforms like LinkedIn or Facebook, every single new person who joins makes the service more valuable for everybody else. That creates a barrier that's almost impossible for a new player to overcome. Okay, this force is a bit more subtle, but it can be absolutely deadly. This isn't about another company doing the same thing you do. It's about a totally different solution that solves the same problem for your customer. A classic example is how video conferencing became a substitute for business travel. They're not the same thing, but they both solve that core need to connect. And this just hits on a core truth of marketing. Your brand really only exists if people are willing to pay more for it. That's the difference between buying coffee and buying Starbucks. If you can't create that unique space in the customer's mind, your product just becomes a commodity. And what happens then? Well, the customer's only move is to click sort by price. And finally, we get to the force that everybody thinks of first, the intensity of rivalry. This is the head-to-head, day-in, day-out battle between the companies that are already in the ring, all fighting for the same piece of the pie and the same customer's attention. And you have to understand this. The toughest competition is almost never about who has the better product. It's about who owns the stronger perception. Companies fight for every inch of shelf space in a store. But the real war, the one that matters, is fought over that priceless real estate inside the customer's mind. Okay, so we've torn apart the theory, but knowing this stuff is pretty useless if you don't do anything with it. So how do you actually turn this analysis into a real strategic weapon? Let's go through the 3 key steps to put it to work. It's a pretty straightforward 3-step process. First, you're scanning the horizon, looking for what's coming next, both the good and the bad. Second, you map out the entire landscape to see who really holds the power.
And then finally, you take all that intelligence and you build a killer value proposition that answers one simple question for your customer. Why should I choose you?
Look, knowing the right moves is only half the battle. You also have to know the common traps people fall into. That can be the difference between a brilliant strategy and, well, a really expensive mistake. Let's look at the biggest one. Here it is. The single biggest mistake people make is thinking they're in a product battle. You're not. You're in a perception battle. Competing on price is just a race to the bottom, a race to zero profit. The real goal, the right way, is to own one powerful idea in your customer's mind. Just like Volvo has owned the idea of safety for decades. All right, enough theory. Let's see how these forces actually smash into each other in the real world. We're going to dive into agribusiness, a huge, high-stakes industry where you see these competitive pressures play out every single day. This industry is just a perfect case study. Think about it. You've got thousands upon thousands of individual farmers. That's a fragmented group of producers. And they're all selling to just a handful of massive retailers and processors. That power imbalance creates just brutal rivalry and constant downward pressure on prices. This right here is basically your playbook for turning this analysis into real action. For every threat, there's a countermove. See your suppliers consolidating? You've got to diversify your sourcing to keep your leverage. Are your buyers obsessed with ROI? Well, don't just sell a product. Give them tools like ROI calculators to prove its value. Worried about new entrants? You build a moat with growth loops, like a referral program that turns your own customers into a sales force. And to avoid becoming a commodity, you use storytelling to make your brand stand out. You see, every force has a strategic lever you can pull. And this really brings us to the ultimate point of all of this. The entire reason we do a 5 forces analysis is to answer one question. How do we build a competitive advantage that can actually last? Because as the legendary CEO Jack Welch said, if you don't have a competitive advantage, don't compete. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. After looking at the forces in your industry, can you clearly say what yours is?